A German Shepherd puppy falling from a 100-foot bridge. Everyone believed they were witnessing a tragedy. But what happened next stunned onlookers and defied all explanation. Get ready for a heart-topping story of survival, extraordinary courage, and a series of events that will make you question what's truly possible. This is the remarkable journey of Atlas, a 3-month-old German Shepherd puppy, whose impossible fall became the beginning of something miraculous. The Riverside Bridge stood as an architectural marvel, spanning the churning waters of the Colorado River. At 100 feet above the water, it offered breathtaking views that attracted tourists and locals alike, especially on perfect May afternoons like this one. Rebecca Morgan, a 34-year-old veterinarian, had decided to take her 3-month-old German Shepherd puppy, Atlas, for their evening walk across the bridge. The energetic pup had nearly completed his vaccinations and was finally exploring the wider world beyond their backyard. Easy, Atlas, Rebecca cautioned as the puppy strained at his new leash, eager to investigate every scent and sound. His oversized paws and ears hinted at the magnificent dog he would become, though his current gangly frame was all puppy enthusiasm. The bridge bustled with the usual evening crowd. Rebecca stopped midway across to admire the view. Atlas sitting obediently at her feet, his tail sweeping the concrete in wide, happy arcs. A cyclist came around the bend too fast, swerving to avoid a pedestrian. The sudden movement startled Atlas, who jumped backward in fear. Rebecca felt the leash pulled from her grip as Atlas backed away in panic, his collar slipping over his head. Atlas, stay, she called desperately, but fear had overwhelmed his training. The puppy backed directly into the pedestrian railing. In any other circumstance, the barrier would have stopped him, but through some cruel twist of fate a section of the lower railing had been damaged by a recent storm. The gap was just wide enough for a small puppy. Time seemed to slow as Rebecca watched. Atlas's hind legs slipped through the opening. His front paws scrabbled frantically at the concrete, brown eyes wide with confusion and terror. He lunged forward, fingers grazing his fur, but unable to grasp him. No! She screamed as Atlas vanished through the gap. Far below, the Colorado River churned with spring runoff, its surface broken by partially submerged rocks and swirling currents. The height was more than enough to be fatal for a human, let alone a 15-pound puppy. Michael Chen, a 28-year-old kayaker who had been preparing to paddle downstream, witnessed the fall. Without hesitation, he launched his kayak into the current, paddling frantically toward the spot where the puppy had disappeared. Beneath the surface, above, Rebecca ran toward the shore access point, her heart pounding with dread. The chances of survival were virtually none. The fall alone could be fatal. Add the dangerous currents and cold water, and hope seemed impossible. Yet, as the crowd watched in stunned silence, something broke the river's surface 30 yards downstream from the impact point. A small, wet head, desperately paddling. Atlas was alive, but the miracle had only just begun. Michael maneuvered his kayak through the turning rapids, eyes locked on the struggling puppy. Atlas was fighting the current with everything his small body had, but was being swept downstream at an alarming rate. Hang on, buddy, Michael called, though he knew the terrified animal couldn't understand. The kayaker had rescued stranded wildlife before, but never in such treacherous conditions. On the shore, Rebecca ran alongside the river, scrambling over rocks and underbrush, her medical training at war with her emotional panic. "Please," she whispered repeatedly, a prayer to whoever might be listening. Atlas disappeared underwater again, then resurfaced several yards farther downstream, clearly weakening. His small head barely broke the surface now, and his paddling had become erratic. Michael pushed his paddle deeper, gaining speed. He was close now, perhaps 15 feet from the struggling puppy. But what he didn't see was the partially submerged tree trunk ahead, its gnarled branches creating a deadly strainer in the current. Atlas was heading directly for. Just as Atlas approached the deadly branches, something remarkable happened. A large branch floating nearby seemed to shift course unnaturally, sliding between Atlas and the strainer. The puppy collided with this makeshift barrier instead, momentarily protected from the deadlier obstacle. Michael didn't question the lucky break. He closed the distance and reached out with his paddle. Grab on, boy. Whether by instinct or desperation, Atlas managed to get his front paws on the paddle blade. With tremendous care, Michael guided his kayak sideways and lifted the waterlogged puppy aboard. But the river wasn't finished with them yet. A sudden hydraulic wave appeared directly in their path. The kayak tipped precariously as they hit the churning water. Michael braced himself, using his body to shield the puppy. In that critical moment, Atlas seemed to understand his protector's intentions. Instead of panicking, the puppy went still, pressing himself against Michael's chest. Their unexpected teamwork allowed Michael to execute a role that kept them upright. They pushed through the hydraulic and into calmer water. As they approached the shore, Rebecca waded knee-deep into the water. Michael handed the wet bundle of fur to her waiting arms. Atlas immediately recognized his owner, his tail giving one weak wag before he collapsed against her chest, utterly exhausted. "He's alive," Rebecca whispered, tears streaming down her face as she quickly assessed her puppy. Emergency services arrived minutes later, including Dr. James Wilson, a fellow veterinarian who had been driving nearby when the call came in. He helped Rebecca perform a thorough examination of Atlas right there on the riverbank. "This doesn't make sense," Dr. Wilson muttered, checking the puppy's limbs, spine, and abdomen. A fall from that height should have caused severe internal injuries, broken bones at minimum. Yet Atlas had no broken bones, no signs of internal bleeding, not even a sprain. Beyond exhaustion, mild hypothermia, and a few superficial scratches, the puppy seemed miraculously unharmed. "It's impossible," Rebecca agreed, wrapping Atlas in emergency blankets as the shivering subsided. "But here he is." What no one realized then was that Atlas's survival wasn't just lucky. It was the beginning of something extraordinary that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the connection between animals and the world around them. Atlas spent the night under observation at Rebecca's veterinary clinic. Despite all medical expectations, the puppy's recovery was remarkable. By morning, he was alert, eating normally, and showing no signs of trauma beyond a slight limp in his right hind leg. I've never seen anything like it, Rebecca told Michael, who had stopped by to check on the puppy. The fall alone should have been fatal. Even if he somehow survived that, the hypothermia and exhaustion should have caused more lasting effects. Atlas wagged his tail at the sound of Michael's voice, ears perked forward in recognition. When the kayaker knelt to greet him, the puppy licked his hand enthusiastically. Looks like someone remembers his rescuer. Rebecca smiled. You're his hero. Michael shook his head. I'm just glad I was there. But that was some coincidence with the branch blocking him from that strainer. I've never seen the river current move debris like that before. What happened next caught them both by surprise. Atlas suddenly stood at attention, staring intently at the clinic window. Outside, dark clouds were gathering, though no rain had been forecast. That's odd, Rebecca said. The weather report was clear skies all day. Within minutes, an unexpected thunderstorm broke over the town. Atlas had somehow sensed it coming before the first clouds were visible. Over the next week, Rebecca noticed other unusual behaviors. Atlas consistently anticipated the doorbell seconds before it rang. He would stand by his water bowl moments before Rebecca realized it needed refilling. Most strikingly, he began bringing Rebecca her phone just before it received calls, as if he could sense the incoming connection. It's probably just coincidence, she told herself, though less convincingly each time. Weeks after the fall, Rebecca took Atlas for his first return visit to the riverside, staying far from the bridge. As they approached the water, Atlas stopped, his whole body rigid with attention. His ears swiveled forward, nose working the air. Then he bolted, pulling the leash from Rebecca's hand. She chased after him, calling his name. But the puppy was running with purpose, toward a dense patch of shoreline reeds. When Rebecca caught up, she found Atlas pawing frantically at the muddy bank, whining with distress. Thinking he might have found an injured animal, she knelt beside him. The sound was so faint she almost missed it, a weak mewing coming from beneath a tangle of debris. Rebecca carefully pulled back the reeds to reveal a plastic bag half submerged in the water. Inside were 3 tiny kittens, barely a week old, soaked and nearly motionless. Oh my God, she gasped, immediately wrapping the fragile creatures in her jacket. How did you know? Atlas watched intently as Rebecca examined each kitten. Their condition was critical, hypothermic and weak from dehydration. They must have been dumped recently and would certainly have drowned once the tide rose. Dr. Wilson arrived to help, puzzled by the sudden emergency. How did you even find them? They weren't visible from the path. I didn't find them, Rebecca replied, nodding toward Atlas. He did. Somehow he knew exactly where they were. Later that evening, with the kittens stabilized in an incubator, Rebecca sat with Atlas at her feet, trying to make sense of it. Well, the puppy that had miraculously survived the unsurvivable was now exhibiting behaviors that defied explanation. It was as if his fall had awakened something inside him, a heightened awareness, an impossible intuition. What happened to you out there? She whispered, stroking his ears. What did you bring back from the river? Atlas looked up at her with eyes that suddenly seemed older than his. months, more knowing than any dog should be. 1 month after his fall, Atlas had grown noticeably, though still unmistakably a puppy. His coat was thickening into the classic black and tan of a German shepherd, his lanky frame beginning to show hints of the powerful dog he would become. But his physical development was overshadowed by the increasingly remarkable abilities he displayed. Rebecca had begun keeping a detailed journal documenting each incident that defied conventional explanation. The pattern was unmistakable. Atlas could sense things before they happened, detect distress from impossible distances, and locate people or animals in need with uncanny precision. Dr. Wilson, initially skeptical, became a believer after witnessing Atlas's abilities firsthand during a routine examination of a cat named Shadow. The puppy suddenly became agitated, pawing at the examining table with unusual intensity. "What's gotten into him?" Wilson asked, watching Atlas's frantic behavior. Rebecca had learned to trust the puppy's instincts. "Check Shadow again. Something's wrong." Wilson repeated his examination, this time running additional tests. To his shock, he discovered the early stages of an abdominal obstruction that had shown no clinical symptoms, a potentially fatal condition caught before any traditional veterinary procedure would have detected. "That's not possible," Wilson whispered, looking between the diagnostic results and the now calm puppy. There were no indicators. "Not for us," Rebecca said, simply. But for him, news of Atlas's abilities spread through their small town of Riverside. What began as local curiosity soon attracted wider attention. A reporter from the regional newspaper wrote a feature article titled "The Miracle Puppy of Riverside Bridge," complete with photographs of Atlas and interviews with witnesses to his extraordinary abilities. Michael Chen, who had maintained a close friendship with Rebecca and Atlas since the rescue, suggested they visit the river again. "It's where it all began," he pointed. "Maybe there's a connection." The riverside, Atlas showed no fear of the water that had nearly claimed his life. Instead, he approached the edge with evident purpose, studying the currents with an intensity that seemed impossible for a dog his age. When a family with small children began setting up a picnic nearby, Atlas suddenly abandoned his contemplation of the water. The puppy raced toward the family, barking urgently. Rebecca followed, apologizing for the interruption until she saw what Atlas had detected. A young boy was opening a food container filled with chocolate-covered nuts, about to share them with the family's Labrador retriever. "Stop!" Rebecca called out. "Chocolate is toxic to dogs." The family was stunned. The container had been closed and Atlas had been at least 30 feet away when they had unpacked it. There was no way he could have seen or smelled its contents. "Oh, did he know?" the mother asked, looking at Atlas with newfound respect. That evening, Dr. Wilson visited Rebecca's clinic with a proposal. "We need to document this properly," he said. "Bring in someone with expertise in canine cognition. Whatever happened to Atlas when he fell from that bridge? It could revolutionize how we understand animal perception." Wilson contacted Dr. Elenina Reeves, a renowned researcher specializing in canine cognition from Colorado State University. Under her observation, Atlas demonstrated abilities that defied scientific explanation, detecting hidden objects through solid barriers, anticipating events before they occurred, and perceiving distress before any physical symptoms appeared. This puppy isn't just special, Dr. Reeves concluded after a week of testing. The fall didn't just spare him, it awakened something extraordinary. By the time Atlas reached 5 months of age, his reputation had spread beyond Riverside. The local newspaper story had been picked up by national media, bringing a wave of attention to the small town and its miraculous puppy. Reeves' preliminary research paper had ignited debate in academic circles about the nature and limits of canine perception. Rebecca had become fiercely protective, filtering the increasing requests for demonstrations and research access. She was determined that Atlas's welfare would never be compromised by scientific curiosity or media sensationalism. Despite her concerns, Rebecca couldn't ignore the growing evidence of Atlas's potential to help others. The puppy had already been responsible for several life-saving interventions, from detecting an undiagnosed heart condition in a clinic visitor to alerting Rebecca to an electrical fault before it could cause a fire. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Rebecca took Atlas to Lake Carson, a popular recreation area outside town. The lake was crowded with weekend visitors enjoying the first truly warm day of summer. Atlas was practicing basic obedience commands when he suddenly went rigid, staring toward the swimming area. Without warning, he bolted, ignoring Rebecca's recall command completely. She chased after him, apologizing as he weaved between sunbathers. Atlas raced to the shoreline and plunged into the water without hesitation, swimming with power and precision that belied his youth. Lifeguards were already responding to commotion 50 yards offshore where a teenage girl had disappeared beneath the surface while swimming with friends. Her companions were calling for help, pointing frantically at the spot where she had vanished. Atlas reached the location before the lifeguards dove underwater, and moments later surfaced with the girl's shirt and his teeth. He struggled to keep her face above water until rescue personnel arrived to take over. The girl was unconscious but alive, having suffered a seizure while swimming. He knew exactly where she was. One lifeguard marveled as paramedics worked to revive the teenager. She had gone under without a sound. Even her friends couldn't pinpoint the location. The incident made national news with cell phone footage of Alice's rescue spreading across social media. Overnight, the miracle puppy became a sensation. Interview requests flooded Rebecca's phone, while research institutes offered substantial grants to study Atlas's abilities. Dr. Reeves helped Rebecca navigate the sudden attention, establishing boundaries to protect Atlas, while allowing for continued documentation of his extraordinary capabilities. Together, they developed a protocol to share their findings with the scientific community while ensuring the young dog wasn't overwhelmed or exploited. His abilities appear to be strengthening, Dr. Reeves noted during their regular assessment session. The range of his awareness is expanding, and he's demonstrating increasing precision in his interventions. This was confirmed dramatically when Atlas abruptly abandoned his dinner one evening, racing to Rebecca's side with such urgency that she immediately followed him to her car. Without clear direction, she allowed him to guide her through a series of turns leading out of town. They arrived at a hiking trail where a search was being organized for a missing diabetic hiker. Atlas immediately took the lead, pulling them away from the main trail into dense underbrush where conventional search patterns hadn't yet extended. Within 20 minutes, Atlas located the missing man. The hiker had wandered off trail after becoming disoriented from low blood sugar, then fallen into a shallow ravine. "Your dog saved my life," the man told Rebecca later at the hospital. "The doctor said I wouldn't have survived the night out there." 6 months after his fall, Atlas had matured into a striking adolescent German Shepherd. Though still not fully grown, he moved with the confidence and purpose of a much older dog. His puppy playfulness remained, but was increasingly balanced by an uncanny focus that emerged whenever his special abilities were needed. Dr. Reeves had expanded her research team, bringing in specialists in neurology, animal behavior, and even quantum physics. Their findings consistently defied conventional scientific explanations. Atlas could detect electromagnetic field changes imperceptible to instruments' sense biochemical shifts in living organisms before symptoms appeared and most remarkably anticipate events minutes to hours before they occurred. His brain is processing information at a level we've never documented in any species, Dr. Reeves explained, reviewing the latest scan results. "It's as if the trauma of the fall reconfigured his neural pathways, opening channels of perception most beings never access." On a crisp autumn morning, Rebecca woke to find Atlas sitting attentively by her bedside, his expression unusually intent. This behavior had become a reliable indicator that something required their attention. "What is it, boy?" she asked. Immediately alert, Atlas led her outside, where the day was just beginning. Nothing seemed to miss in the quiet neighborhood. Yet the German Shepherd's body language conveyed absolute certainty. He oriented himself toward the mountains west of town, his focus unwavering. Rebecca had learned to trust these signals implicitly. She gathered emergency supplies, loaded Atlas into her SUV, and began driving toward the mountain range. No calls had come in, no alerts had been issued, but experience had taught her that Atlas's awareness often preceded official recognition of emergencies. They drove for nearly an hour, following forest roads deeper into the wilderness. Finally, they arrived at a remote trail head where a single vehicle sat, abandoned in the parking area. "Someone's in trouble up there," Rebecca murmured, reading Atlas's body language. She called emergency services to report their location and suspicions, then prepared for a search. Atlas took the lead immediately, moving up the trail with purpose rather than following the scent patterns typical of search dogs. This was another aspect of his unique abilities. He didn't track in the conventional sense, but seemed to perceive distress directly, regardless of physical traces. 2 miles into the forest, they found her, a wildlife photographer who had fallen from an overlooking ridge while trying to photograph eagles. Her injuries weren't life-threatening, but a broken ankle had left her stranded overnight, her cell phone smashed in the fall. "How did you find me?" she asked, as Rebecca administered first aid. "I wasn't even supposed to be here. No one knew where I was going." Rebecca nodded toward Atlas, who had positioned himself as a sentry, scanning their surroundings with alert attention. He knew you needed help. What made this rescue particularly remarkable was what they learned afterward. The photographer, Lisa Chen, had been falling in and out of consciousness due to pain and exposure. During her lucid moments, she had focused intensely on visualizing help arriving, specifically imagining a German shepherd finding her. "I don't know why I pictured a German shepherd," she told Rebecca as they waited for the rescue helicopter. "I've never even owned a dog. The image just came to me strongly, and I held on to it." This incident triggered a new phase in Dr. Reeves' research. It suggests a two-way connection. He theorized not just Atlas sensing distress, but potentially responding to directed thought, a form of consciousness bridging we've never documented before. 1 year had passed since Atlas's impossible fall from Riverside Bridge. He had grown into a magnificent young German shepherd, his puppy clumsiness replaced by the dignified bearing of his breed. At 15 months old, he was still maturing physically, but there was nothing immature about the intelligence in his amber eyes. The anniversary found Rebecca and Atlas walking along the riverbank, Dr. Reeves accompanying them with her research notebook. The scientist had documented hundreds of instances of Atlas's extraordinary abilities, building a case study unlike any in scientific literature. We've confirmed 17 distinct perceptual expansions, Dr. Reeves explained as they walked from electromagnetic sensitivity to what can only be described as consciousness bridging. He's essentially experiencing reality through dimensions most beings never access. Rebecca nodded, though her attention remained on Atlas. The German shepherd moved with unusual purpose today, his focus drawn repeatedly to the bridge above them, the site of his fateful fall. He wants to go up there, Rebecca realized. He's been guiding us toward the access path all morning. Dr. Reeves looked concerned. Are you sure that's wise? Could trigger trauma responses. But Rebecca trusted Atlas's instincts completely. If he wants to return to the bridge, there's a reason. They made their way up the winding path to the bridge's pedestrian walkway. Atlas showed no fear or hesitation as they approached the spot where he had fallen. Through the damaged railing, the section had been repaired, reinforced with additional safety measures. At the center of the bridge, Atlas stopped, sitting precisely where he had fallen 1 year earlier. His posture was alert, but calm, his attention focused on the rushing water far below. "What is it, boy?" Rebecca asked, kneeling beside him. "What are you sensing?" For several minutes, Atlas remained perfectly still, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then he did something unprecedented. He placed his paw directly over Rebecca's heart, fixing her with an intense gaze. In that moment, Rebecca experienced something extraordinary. The world around her seemed to shift, overlaid with patterns of energy and connection she had no words to describe. She could feel the water molecules moving beneath the bridge, sense the electrical impulses of tiny creatures in the soil, even perceived the slow pulse of growth in the trees along the shoreline. The experience lasted only seconds before fading, leaving her gasping. "What was that?" she whispered. Dr. Reeves looked alarmed. What happened? Are you all right? Oh, I felt what he feels. Rebecca struggled to articulate the experience. It was like seeing, through his perception, everything connected, everything visible across time. Atlas watched her calmly as if this sharing had been his intention all along. When he stood and moved to Dr. Reeves, the scientist instinctively reached out. The same connection formed. As Atlas placed his paw against her, and extraordinary, she breathed moments later. Scientific detachment temporarily abandoned. It's not just that he perceives differently. He can share that perception, create a bridge between consciousnesses. In the months that followed, this ability became Atlas's most remarkable contribution. Working with carefully selected researchers and emergency responders, he demonstrated how his shared perception could revolutionize search and rescue operations, medical diagnosis, and disaster prevention. His second birthday, Atlas received recognition from the governor, a specialized service medal acknowledging the lives he had directly saved through his extraordinary abilities. That evening, as Atlas sat beside her, watching the sunset over the river that had nearly claimed him, Rebecca reflected on the miracle that had begun with tragedy. The puppy who had fallen from Riverside Bridge hadn't just survived against impossible odds. He had returned with a gift, a glimpse into perceptions beyond human understanding, and the ability to share that perception with others. You were always meant to fall, she whispered, her hand resting on his strong shoulder.